here today to do my Book of the Month review, and it is for Foundation by Mercedes Lackey. It is the first book in the Collegium Chronicles, I believe they call it. Yeah, but it is like the 30th book written in this world, and I find that the way it's written really reflects that it has a really massive world and that has already been explained. Given the experience I had with the book, I don't think it was too hard for me to understand kind of what was going on based on where this book started. And the book itself is essentially a boy, his horse, and magic school. And from here, I'm going to touch on some of the plot and give you some pros and cons. This is a very new setup for the Book of the Month, but I thought I would change up the review style to something that I felt might be more effective to getting across my experience with the book. And so I'll just jump right in. So the story itself progressed really well. You constantly were learning new things about the world, or the specific story arc within this book was progressed. And although the book itself didn't have a really specific goal, you can tell based on how this is written that long term, this is going to be a really good main character arc, and it's setting up for a really high stakes situation. Within the progression, there's also good pacing. The book never really dragged, but it was never rushed either. It progressed at a really good pace because, like I said, you were constantly learning new things without it being overwhelming or without having a lot of info dumps. Certain things about the world seem to be assumed, and I don't know if they were talked about in other books or not, having never read any of the other series, but they were still mentioned in a context where you were able to kind of extrapolate what they meant, which was really nice because that paired really well with the stuff that they did have to explain in depth. Like I had mentioned, there are some things that aren't really explained well in this book, be it because the author's holding back for a very deliberate purpose for something later in the book. Like there are some secrets that are kind of hinted at with the story and the main character. But then I had also mentioned in the other books, there is a possibility that some of the stuff is just explained there, and I don't know it, having never read those other books, but regardless, the way it's done feels pretty deliberate and not sloppy. This book was very definitely written for a younger audience. I would compare it to the audience that grew up reading Harry Potter. However, the way it's written isn't condescending or too immature. It's written in a way that is really accessible for a large audience. Like, I didn't find myself reading the story and being like, oh, this is for kids. I was never disappointed with the content. And overall, the plot was fun. It was intriguing, even if it was very clearly the first book in a multi-book series, so there wasn't a clear short-term goal or a clear long-term goal. But it really did a good job establishing this character and this group of friends. Speaking of the main character and friends, I'm now going to jump over into my characters. I don't have a ton to say here, as a lot of the characters are still developing, especially the people who are going to later be in what I assume are the main character's intimate friend group. So the main character is Mags, no last name. He was an orphan who was slave labor in a mine, leading up to his transition with his horse and magic school. So far, he seems to be very hardworking and very likable, and he's very humble. However, he does have the potential, based on how he's written in this first book, to become a Mary Sue. So if that's not your thing, I would definitely be hesitant. I say he's hardworking because in the school setting, because he was the slave labor previously, he doesn't have the education to be scholastically on par with some of his peers. So he feels like he has a lot of ground to make up there. But it seems to be implied he has this really great power, in terms of the strength of it. And it's more that he hasn't really let himself exercise it yet, but once he gets there, he'll just have this innate power that he can do whatever with. So there is the potential for that Mary Sue part to come forward. The other thing I like about this book is the animal companions so far don't seem to be annoying. If you don't like animal companions at all, this probably will be annoying, but Dallin, Meg's companion, is really intelligent and really independent, has a really good sense of autonomy. Even though they do have a telepathic link, they both still feel very individual. And when you're reading them, their personalities are separate. Dallin is also really good for world building. He's experienced a lot more of the world than Megs has, and so conversations Megs has with Dallin really do a good job of world building and kind of informing the reader without being too info dumpy, which is wonderful, because there's nothing I hate more than a high fantasy book that dumps chapters of information on you at the beginning of the book. Like I said, because there's so many characters that are still becoming established, the main character included, but here I'm specifically referring to his friends, I find that the characters are a little two-dimensional right now. So if you're looking for very strong characters right off the hop, you are probably going to be a little disappointed. There are these outlines for these really interesting characters based on how they've been written to this point, but it's really going to be there's going to be more development with them and their relationships with each other and with Megs moving forward. So I really expect them to be a lot stronger in the later books in this series, once their personalities are a little bit more established and more information about their home life kind of comes forward. So I am excited to read more of this series, because those characters, like, this entire book is just a really solid base for a series. And with that, I'm going to move into my wrap up. I did try to keep it pretty spoiler free in the beginning here. I didn't do anything past the first couple chapters. And then after I'm done the wrap up, I will do my book club questions as I do normally. So the book itself is about a 3.5 out of 5 stars for me. It's a good book. Not a great book, but a good book. It's a great start to the series. Like I said, the story and the characters are very good building blocks to what could become a really terrific story arc. So I am interested in continuing to read it. And although I don't typically love talking animals, I did enjoy Dallin. He came across more as a human character, just with the maturity in which he spoke and the patience he had for Megs' character. I love me magic school, so that's what got me hooked in the first place, and it did not disappoint. It's setting up in such a way that it will be very, very interesting to read about moving forward, because as with every magic school, there's a little bit going on behind the scenes that's going to be really interesting to find out. So, and I would recommend this to people who really like kind of the middle grade young adult fantasy, especially if you enjoyed the beginning of the Harry Potter series. This has very similar vibes. That's it for kind of the spoiler-free section. I will be doing the book club questions, and I will not be pulling punches. Some of my answers will be spoilery, so if you want to avoid that content, I would click off now. So with the book club questions, I really haven't changed any of them with this new setup. They are still the same 6 questions that I feel were the easiest and the most fun to answer. My first question, what was your initial reaction? My initial reaction was intrigue, because I loved Megs' backstory. It was full of intrigue, but also full of sympathy and patience. So you put up with a lot with his character in the beginning when he was still learning. But then also, because he was learning from such a disadvantaged point, you really, at least I did, really started cheering for him very quickly. My second question is, what was your favorite chapter or scene? For me, I would have to say it was the Midwinter's Eve bonfire celebration, which is kind of like their New Year's Eve, but way more in-depth celebrations. And there is a character, what was her name? Emily, who has a physical issue with her leg, and as such is a little more retiring when it comes to certain celebrations. The one specifically where they were out at the bonfire after the prayer session. Megs does this really good deed. He and Dallin get Emily on top of Dallin, or on Dallin's back, and it really kind of pulls her more into the celebration than she was before. And it was just a really good scene in terms of setting up the potential relationship for Emily and Mags, as well as also kind of showing you what kind of person Mags is based on the reasoning behind doing it, and then how he felt afterwards. Question 3, how did the characters change throughout the story? Because this is a magic school setting, the characters change pretty quickly because you're going over the course of a school year, essentially. This I don't think was quite a full school year, but it was a number of months. And as such, the characters changed a lot, especially with Mags, because he was dealing with some really serious mental health issues because of the situation he came out of. It was really interesting to watch him grow and recover and see Dallin and some of the other adults around him aiding with his recovery, as well as his friends aiding with his recovery, both those at school and those that he meets during the midwinter break. They did a lot of growing, but they stopped at a point where there's still a lot of potential moving forward for recovery, for falling back into old ways and old fears, and I'm really interested to see how it plays out and how where the characters started will affect where they go. Question 4, how did you like the ending? I actually found it really intriguing. They left it open, so moving forward there will be a lot more going on. But they also wrapped up the minor conflict that came up, and I'll be interested to see how the consequences from that play out. And it's open for just like a really nice transition into book 2. And that leads me to question 5. Would you read more by this author? As I mentioned in my wrap up, I would definitely pick up the second book from this. It was intriguing enough that I want to find out where the characters go, and I want to see how many of the secrets are revealed in the second book. And what does this book remind you of? Honestly, it gives me kind of Harry Potter vibes, which is why I said if you liked Harry Potter, you'd probably like this. But I'm hesitant to necessarily recommend that connection, just because J.K. Rowling has done some things recently. So there's nothing else that really has the same feel that I've read that I can think of. But that's the vibe crossover, so if you enjoyed that story, but don't want to support J.K. Rowling, maybe give this a chance, because as far as I know, this author is less problematic. And that is all I have to say. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know below if you guys like the new setup, if you've got this far, or if you have any suggestions, or even if you've read this book, if there's anything else you think I would enjoy checking out because I enjoyed this. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.